How can we go around saying that we're a remnant? I mean, theologically, we see that in the passages of Scripture, but how does it feel like we're a remnant if 60+% of Americans call themselves Christians? So I was having a conversation with a reporter from USA Today about this very topic, and she challenged me to write an article about it. And the article kind of became a really helpful, I think, way to explain our current cultural situation. I'm just use my hands to illustrate it. This was about 10 years ago when I wrote the article. The numbers would be a little different today. But I explained that, because she said, the majority of Americans are Christians. She was asking, how are Christians feeling today? And I said, well, we're kind of feeling marginalized in culture. We're feeling like the values are shifting away from a Judeo-Christian worldview and more. And I think you would relate to that. You would say that's what we see as well. And she said, but at that time, 70+% Americans said they were Christians. And I said, well, here's the thing, and this is a little strange, but Christians actually don't believe that everyone who says they're a Christian is actually a Christian. And she thought that was the strangest thing. She said, so they think they're on your team and you think they're not on your team? I said, well, no, I think ultimately Christian in America is almost a cultural identification. I'm a good person. I was born in America. Maybe I use those terms to describe myself as Christian. So I kind of explained to her, and then I wrote an article in USA Today that sort of unpacked this. And I said, you got to look in terms of America as having like 4 quartiles. About 25% at the time, about 25% of Americans say that they're not Christian. They're either secular, they're none of the above, or they're another religion, Jewish, Muslim, whatever it may be. And at that time, about 75% of Americans said that they were Christians. Now it's in the high 60s, depending on what study you look to. And I said, but of these people, they're not all the same. So you've got non-Christians right here, right? And then you've got Christians, but only about 25% of Americans say that they're Christian, and it really means something to them. And that's not just evangelicals like us here at Crossroads, but people use the word Christian to describe themselves, and it's kind of something that shapes their lives. About 25% of Americans are what I called congregational Christians. They go to church on Christmas and Easter. They have a loose connect. Maybe they want to be married in a church. And about 25% of Americans are cultural Christians. They don't really think of themselves as Christians in something of a practice, but more of a cultural identification. So there's the 3. So Christians, but we got to sort of think of them as sort of different types. And so for us today, we might think of these convictional Christians, who about half of whom will be evangelicals, are actually what we might call something like a remnant. Now, I used my fingers to describe this in my conversation with Kathy, the reporter, but then eventually I turned it into a graphic.